Hello potential viewers, welcome to my channel. If you have been slightly interested in the cultural clash between the internet users of the Western world and the internet users of China, you would have heard of the word Baizuo, or white left. The term started gaining popularity ever since the US election of 2016. It gained some level of internet attention at Western world at first, and later even got featured on Tucker Carlson's show.
Baizuo, its literal translation is white left, according to political scientist Chen Zhang, who wrote about the term in a recent Open Democracy piece. Members of the white left are, in the view of the Chinese, quote, biased, elitist, ignorant of social reality, and constantly applying double standards. They only care about topics like immigration, minorities, LGBT, and the environment, and have, quote, no sense of real problems in the real world. They're people obsessed with political correctness to the extent they, quote, tolerate backward Islamic values for the sake of multiculturalism. And on top of that, they say, the white left, quote, pity the rest of the world and think they are saviors. Sounds like the Chinese are watching pretty carefully. The term first became popular 2 years ago to describe Angela Merkel and her decision to welcome more than 1 million third world immigrants to Europe. Chinese students and job seekers complained they had to work very hard to stay in Europe, while unskilled migrants could simply show up, claim asylum, and get welfare.
Even though Tucker Carlson here is technically quoting a social science student's work, which is actually a piece attacking those on the right side of the political spectrum and arguing that the attack on the leftist ideals and propaganda is a sign of the uprising right-wing and nationalist sentiment in China, and it is leading to growth of social divide and social Darwinism in China, as well as the Western world. And for many people who are reporting and commenting on this newly invented and politically charged word, they mostly grasp what Tucker Carlson has covered, that it is a word targeting white, middle, or upper-class liberals and leftists on their willful ignorance, hypocrisy, and self-righteousness. And in many contexts, this word is also used to attack overtly liberal and progressive policies and laws that cater to the feeble-minded and perpetually offended crowd, which is in almost all cases have some feel-good facade, yet in their core are reckless, authoritarian, and even outright stupid. One other word that is closely related to Baizuo, as Black Pigeon Speak correctly and astutely pointed out, was the word Shengmu, or Holy Mother. This word does not have any racial undertone, and it is often non-gender specific either. It is a word used to describe the kind of people, behavior, or laws and policies that are more concerned with satisfying the need to feel good than being in the right, rather than being effective and solution-oriented. Some of the easiest examples of Baizuo or Shengmu policies and ideas include migrant policies taken by Germany and a lot of European countries, and Justin Trudeau's call to welcome ISIS fighters back to Canada. These are policies and ideals that make the politicians sound good and compassionate, yet they are not the ones that have to deal with the consequences of the implementation, privatizing the political capital gain and socializing the consequences, so to speak. But most of the people covering the source of Baizuo, especially in the English-speaking world, have failed to properly trace the source of its origin and how it got popularized, and especially the one who originally coined it. And what I have to offer that is different from many of these individuals is that I was lucky enough to have the chance to witness it firsthand. So for starters, I introduce you to the one-person internet phenomenon and the de facto thought leader of quote-unquote the Chinese alt-right. If you would like to know, his real name is Shuo Li, a Manchurian, one of the most influential internet figures, and probably the one with the most taboo of thoughts in the Chinese internet sphere from the 2010s. On August 28, 2010, on the then influential Chinese social network Renren.com, modeled mostly after Facebook, an article named The Hypocrisy of the Western White Left, Baizuo, and the Chinese Patriotic Scientist, was written and published by Mr. Li. And it was the first ever occurrence of the word on all of the internet. In this article, the main object of the to-the-bones analysis and scorching criticism was the so-called patriotic scientists that have been promoted by the Chinese Communist Party propaganda, especially Qian Xuesen, who was a scientist from Caltech during the 1950s and fled the US due to the McCarthyism and ended up being a leading propagandist due to his scientific credentials in communist China. And this was because of the target audience being mainly young college-age netizens of China, who are the first and only generation of China who had a brief taste of freedom of information. Besides exposing the deed of Qian Xuesen and his role of perpetuating the propaganda of intentionally inflating the net produce of farm crops that ended up partially contributing to the Great Famine during the Great Leap Forward, Mr. Li also threw down this scorching commentary on late US nuclear physicist John Hinton on her and her husband's move to China, becoming fervent followers of the Maoist ideology and lending their knowledge in building the socialist economy of China. In fact, to the average person, Miss John Hinton is a virtuous individual. She not only lived a very simple life, but also gave away a lot of her own possessions in aiding the poor. She just happened to turn a blind eye towards the tens of millions of deaths during the age of the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. And as a white person, an American, an international left-winger, her stance was far more influential than millions of Chinese people combined. Yet she chose to ignore the greatest suffering ever endured by any groups of the human on earth, just for the sake of her staunch adherence to her ideals and her puritanical pursuit of moralism. To me, the harm done by the silence towards and tolerance of the great evils far outweighs what little personal charitable deeds could ever heal. The destruction brought by the zealous pursuit of higher moral causes without the guidance of reason far outweighs the good from the causes themselves.
I agree with that.
Then why the fuck did you accept the position?
Because
Who
I have
the
a
fuck hired you?
I have a different
You
vision
should
than you.
step down. If that is what you think about being ambassador, you should step down.
As it pertained to Dr. Ford, everyone wanted, high-level Democrats said she should be believed, that they believed it happened. You said if someone like Dr. Ford were to come out, the essence of what she is saying has to be believed, has to be real.
No.
Why?
And no, what I said, it has to
Why
be.
is it real for Dr. Ford, but not for Tara Reid?
Timely as the Word Baizuo and the indictment of the subject's behavior and sin as it is, if you think Mr. Li is just some rando who just had a one-hit wonder in coining the popular internet slang, you will be wrong. Mr. Li had many political and ideological opponents, especially during his time where Renren.com still had a lot of popularity. In fact, the first article that ever mentioned the word Baizuo is just one of many good works of political discourse he put on the Chinese internet, while it still has a small resemblance of freedom. And it was precisely because of it that he and his ideas gained this level of attention from many young and free-minded thinkers from the same period. He became one of the most representative figures of a new generation of right-wing political dissidents in China. Yes, unlike the pictures Western mainstream media have been painting for decades, there have always been a vibrant group of right-wing political dissidents in China who hold a plethora of far more destructive ideological weapons against the establishment of the Chinese Communist Party than the Western liberal elites and their feelings and naivety-based politics ever did. Somewhat like the case with Einstein winning the Nobel Prize for one of his lesser achievements, while his other contributions to science were not properly recognized till much later. Mr. Li's most important works far exceeded the coining of Baizuo. One of his greatest and criminally underappreciated contributions to the Chinese political discourse is the deconstruction of the idea that China is a nation-state. The cause of its being underappreciated can only be presumed to be the ever-strengthening censorship efforts of the Chinese Communist Party and the heavy promotion of the fabricated sense of nationalism by the propaganda machine. Mr. Li's deconstruction thesis basically states as follows, that China is not a nation, but a prison of nations. The prison is a terrible tradition and historical cycle of one oppressive empire taking over another. And combined with the rise and rule of two Leninist parties, KMT and CCP, forming a tangle that binds culturally and largely geographically independent nations. And the only way for these nations and the people to break free from the ruling of Communist China is not to simply overthrow the regime and build a democracy, but the whole state should dissolve, allowing each nation to succeed from the entanglement. This thesis did not come from nowhere. In my humble opinion, it stemmed from a deep-rooted love for its homeland, Manchuria, or the Dongbei province under the current Chinese Communist Party regime. And empathizing with others that are willing to hear his words, he called for people to devote their love and passion to their homeland and preserving the tradition and language therewith, and not to some empty and often manipulated notion of China. Another important and astute philosophy or methodology of judging the power dynamics in the world, one could rightfully call it so, is the idea of the discrimination hierarchy, where the communities and nations that are more able to generate and preserve political and cultural order, that are more friendly to individual liberty and freedom, and therefore prosperity under capitalism, has an inherent right to discriminate against those communities and nations that are not. This naturally means that owners of mom-and-pop shops and the civilization that protects and promotes them have a God-given right to clown on and spit on those that dole out rainbow-haired screechers and intellectual beating and murdering red guards. You can of course draw a lot of politically incorrect conclusions from that, which I will not comment on, but would just recommend you to check out Mr. Lee's Twitter. The realm of Mr. Lee's influence is not limited to politics, of course. He was also one of the earliest promoters of carnivore and keto-like diet on Chinese social media in the early 2010s, and has introduced ideas and knowledge debunking the food pyramid as well as the demonization of fat, especially animal fat, during those periods when the system study of nutrition and diet has yet to be established in China. If you looked into it, you can even find carnivore dieters in China when it was not even a thing on the internet, not to mention in China. And that is largely thanks to Mr. Lee. Combining the love for his homeland with the stern belief in the principles of individual freedom and liberty, as well as other valuable theses, Mr. Lee developed a system of political and cultural theories, which is lovingly called Shuofa, or the commandments of the Shuo. And there are many who follow and continue to study it, including yours truly. Before I end this video, I would like to share with you this quote from Mr. Lee, and it seemed particularly fitting in the current situation of government overreach during a pandemic. The secret to happiness is freedom. The secret to freedom is courage.